That was satisfying. Whoa, I knew I'd screw it up. That was satisfying. Hello, and welcome to the second annual State of Downtown. Is that right? The second annual State of Downtown? Thank you all for coming, and thank you very much to the City Club for hosting us today, and to the Downtown Cleveland Alliance for organizing all of this. And of course, thanks to everybody who was involved in rescheduling this event for this date and not the date of the blizzard on which it was initially scheduled. I'm Dan Moulthrop with the Civic Commons, and it's a pleasure to be here as always. And I think it's actually kind of fitting that we're having the conversation today in the spring, just as spring has begun and as the crocuses and tulips are popping up. And I'm going to try not to strain this metaphor too much. But when I look around downtown Cleveland, I see a lot of green shoots. In downtown Cleveland, they look like demolished buildings and holes in the ground, but they are green shoots nonetheless that speak to a certain amount of growth that's happening. There's another bit of optimistic context for our conversation today, and it's the fact that this is actually now scheduled after we heard the State of the City from Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, and after he has submitted his next budget, and it appears that the City of Cleveland has a balanced budget for the time being, which is not the same thing that you can say about cities around the country. As the Plain Dealer's Mark Gillespie pointed out recently, Chicago's deficit of $654 million is actually $150 million more than Cleveland's operating budget. So that's worth considering. Of course, along with all the optimism, there's a cloud for the silver lining, and Cleveland, as we know from recent census reports, has lost 17% of its population between 2000 and 2010. That's about 81,000 people. And that's another bit of important context and the backdrop for this conversation. So what we're going to get today is an update on the state of the core of our core city. And we're going to put Cleveland's successes and struggles in the broader context of what's happening in downtowns across the country and across the region. And we'll find out where Cleveland is leading, where it's an outlier, where it stands in relation to its peers, and how we're putting into practice any lessons from the past. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Sitting right next to me is Mike Edwards. He led the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership for 5 years, and he left last month to move back to Spokane. And we're going to find out what kind of lessons Pittsburgh might have for Cleveland, all football references aside. Okay.
No problem. No problem.
Next to Mike is Dave Feehan. He's the president and CEO of Civitas Consultants of Silver Springs, Maryland. He's also the former president and CEO of the International Downtown Association, and before doing that work, he led a lot of economic development efforts in Detroit, Kalamazoo, and Des Moines. So it's nice to welcome him back to the Midwest. Good to see you. And of course, Joseph Marinucci of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance needs very little introduction. He's been at the DCA since its inception, and he was with the Downtown Cleveland Partnership before that, and before that at Playhouse Square. Joe, it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
This is how it's going to work. We're going to talk, each of these gentlemen will sort of offer some opening remarks, about 2 to 3 minutes each. Then we'll have, I've got a whole list of questions, and I'm sure that some of them are the same questions that some of you have as well. And then at about 1 o'clock, about halfway through the program, we'll turn it over to questions from all of you. So if you're thinking about questions, if you've got them, you can begin preparing them now. But Dave Feehan, let's start with you with the big picture.
Well, thank you, Dan. As Dan said, the financial problems of our cities are very well known. Many of our cities are just plain flat broke, and others are struggling with a number of problems, infrastructure problems, pension fund problems. We all have read about states and cities, Pittsburgh being certainly one where Mike and I have done some work on that issue, unfunded liabilities. We have major problems with a lot of our center city school districts. And it doesn't look like the financial problems that we are encountering are going to be resolved quickly. It looks like this is going to be a long, drawn-out recovery, and that spells bad news for city governments. Now, I've often said that not much of any significance gets done in our downtowns without public-private partnerships. And if one of those partners is in deep financial trouble, it makes it a lot more difficult to get things done. But there's good news. And the good news is that downtown organizations have, by and large, figured out how to get downtown revitalized. We know how to do this now. For 30 years, we were struggling with everything from aquariums to festival marketplaces, and we're trying every silver bullet we could find. Well, now we know that downtowns have to be clean. They have to be safe, friendly, attractive. We know what the basics are, and we know what works and what doesn't work for the most part. So that's good news. Business improvement districts, there are now 1,002 in the United States by the most recent count, and these have become the preferred way of doing business. They provide stability, and they get everybody who's a business owner, property owner around the table. Downtowns are proving to be more sustainable. If you look at all of the lead statistics and other statistics, downtowns really, for a number of reasons, are quite sustainable. They're walkable, they're bikeable. A lot of things that we want to have happen are happening in our downtowns. So that's kind of the picture globally as you look at downtowns. But what I'd like to give you is what I call 5 organizing principles going forward from here. These are trends that I see, or possibilities, opportunities I see as we move forward. One of them is that downtown organizations, because of what they are, the way they're staffed, funded, governed, have become, in many ways, a default organization that can oftentimes get things done better, faster, and cheaper. So as Osborne and Gabler said in Reinventing Government, it isn't necessary that government do everything. It's necessary that government see that things get done. And downtown organizations often can do that very well, managing new things like managing public squares, managing parking systems, doing all that sort of thing. So our downtown organizations are going to be a very crucial piece of the future of our cities. The second organizing principle is this: if we design downtown for women, men will follow. Women right now earn $13 trillion globally every year. They represent 51% of the private wealth of the United States. They represent 85% of retail purchases. They are extremely important, and we have not designed our downtowns accordingly. Think about this. For the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, for example, only 2 of 14 secretaries have been women. Only 2 of 16 secretaries of the Department of Transportation have been women. How many women architects, civil engineers, highway engineers, traffic engineers do you know? We got men designing downtowns, and women are in many cases, our primary market. A third point, an organizing principle, is downtown is everybody's neighborhood. So we can't create a kind of a land of Oz that's exclusive to one group or another group. And so we want to make sure that we're inclusive in the way we design downtowns and the way we move forward. Fourth one is retail. Retail is the final frontier for downtowns. Difficult to do. But if you want retail to work, you have to work retail. What I mean by that is you have to commit to retail, you have to commit resources, and you have to understand how retailers think and how they work. And you can get there. There are examples of success. And my final point is that Facebook is the future. And we need to recognize that young people are talking to one another and with one another in ways that a lot of older people simply don't understand. But it isn't enough for an organization like the Joe's organization just simply to talk back and forth with people using social media, because they're talking to one another, and we need to understand how all of that is working. Delta Airlines just announced that they're going to now be able, you'll now be able to purchase your plane tickets via Facebook. Facebook will be kind of the new structure, and I say Facebook generally, social networking will be the new structure that we need to be understanding of and we need to take advantage of. So those are 5 trends that I think are really going to be important as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Dave. Mike?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to be here. It's great to be in Cleveland. I was telling some folks last night I courted my wife in Cleveland, and so it's a wonderful place to come back to. And thank you all for delivering her to me. It's great. It's great. Just a little bit of context. Pittsburgh is, as you know, very much like Cleveland. I believe it's a smaller city. However, the regions, I think, are comparable. With regards to downtown, we have about 140,000 people that work downtown every day. We have a very strong office market, which I think is a bit different than what's going on in Cleveland, and maybe later we can give you some of the specifics of that. But we're enjoying a 92% occupancy rate on Class A office space, which is, outstanding, and rates are going up. So that's kind of unusual. It's one of the better markets, one of the best markets in the country. Our arts and culture, the cultural district is cranking, and convention and visitors is really sort of off the charts this past year. Retail, we have more retail than you might think. We do have a 9-story, well, I guess it's now a 7-story Macy's department store, and we have a Saks Fifth Avenue, all of which provide a nice collection of retail, but it's spread out. It's not Chicago's Michigan Mile kind of street. So that's the retail piece that we need to work on. And then we're behind you with regards to downtown housing. We have about 5,000 units downtown. It's twice what we had 5 years ago, but it's still not enough in order to make some significant changes. In hindsight, there's a couple of things that have gone on in Pittsburgh in the last 10 years that I think are important for downtown. And it's really about public space. And I think it's relevant to some of the projects that you're working on here in Cleveland, Public Square, and what's going to be part of the convention center when the expansion is complete. River Life Task Force, which is not our organization, but it's a partner organization, has done an amazing job of reinvigorating the river edge in and around the downtown core of Pittsburgh. And their vision is a 13-mile, 50-foot back, 50 to 100-foot back greenway that connects all of the surface areas around the 3 rivers that run through downtown Pittsburgh with pedestrian bridges and all sorts of nice amenities. If any of you have been in Pittsburgh for a while, you know it's a pretty hilly place, and so just the fact that it's flat attracts lots of people. When I lived there 25 years ago, you couldn't really ride your bike. I mean, you wouldn't really want to ride your bike. But now what we're finding, and to Dave's point, downtown offers a whole new range of things for people to do, of people of different populations. And so women and kids can come downtown now and really enjoy themselves. And once they become reacquainted with downtown, they're certainly more apt to shop and open a business and sort of all those things that you've heard 100 times. The other public space that we were very involved in is Market Square. If any of you have been to downtown Pittsburgh, Market Square is right in the middle of the triangle. It has had neglect for the last 40 years. And as the business improvement district, we were trying to keep up with clean and safe, and we recognized that Market Square was not a good place, and many of our clean and safe problems were emanating from Market Square. And so we, in hindsight, I mean, we didn't really go into this knowing the full extent of it, but we became managers of public space. And we organized the merchants who were feeling pretty disenfranchised. We organized the property owners in Market Square. We organized them and their relationship to the surrounding larger property owners, the office buildings and such. So we did this whole organizing thing. And then we went to our foundation community. Instead of just going in and saying, oh, we got to rip this all up and make a big investment, we did some what we call design experiments. I can talk a little bit more about this later. But we tried things out before we actually turned any dirt. They proved to be very effective, both on the programming side and the design side. And now there's a new $5 million European piazza. We removed the bus line that came right through the center of our square, made it completely unusable. And so no more buses come through Market Square. There's still vehicular traffic around. But it's one big flat surface with twice as much sidewalk. And we've automatically doubled the business for the restaurants because they got more seats outside than they have inside. So it's really, it comes out, it's a public space project, but it came out to be really an economic development project. I have other comments, but I'll save them for later.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike Edwards is formerly of the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership. Joe Marinucci of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance.
Dan, thank you, and thank you all for being here. For those of you that were here last year, you know we had about 125 people. This year we have 250 people in this room. So it's a testament to all of you in terms of your interest in downtown, and again, we really appreciate it. It was a little difficult trying to think of a 3-minute opening to talk about in terms of our downtown, because all of you are in downtown. You experience it every day, and you're well aware of some of the strengths and some of the challenges that we face. But I thought, at least in this opening, that I would really touch on 2 points and give you 3 examples that reflect those points. The first is everything that we do, we try to do with strategic partnerships, whether it's the City of Cleveland, whether it's the Mayor's Office, whether it's Joe Sipperman, whether it's our strategic partners like Greater Cleveland Partnership and Parkworks and Positively Cleveland. We try to approach all of those, whether, again, it's foundation partners, our neighborhood-based partners, and as I think you alluded to, Mike, try to bring people together in terms of thinking through opportunities and thinking through potential solutions as it relates to that. The second theme is really that of connectivity. And really that, I think, is going to be our core challenge moving forward. And I won't talk about the group plan commission process. I know Dan will have some questions a little bit later on that. But when you think of connectivity, we can obviously think in terms of physical connectivity, but again, think in terms of organizational connectivity and those strategic partnerships. And again, to think with you about 3 ways that that's played out very recently. You read in the newspaper today what's happened in the Flats in terms of the Flats Oxbow Association. But through those strategic partnerships, we began to look at the Flats actually a number of months ago. Joe Sipperman convened a group of stakeholders, including the Alliance and the Warehouse District, Ohio City and Tremont, and really brought those people together to begin to think about what our vision collectively would be for the Flats and what type of governance we'd like to see. As part of that, we all signed a memorandum of understanding at the time with all the organizations that I just mentioned, anticipating that given the challenges that Flats Oxbow faced, that we might at some point need to step in and provide direct services. So it was kind of very, very interesting that what came out today really reflected what we've been thinking through as an organization. And of course, many of you participated in a visioning session that we had in the Flats. We had 385 people come and spend 5 hours at Windows on the River to begin thinking about what the next steps are and how we can move that forward. And again, it's that collaboration and working through those types of issues. The second is the office market. When we approached property owners to reauthorize the Business Improvement District, one of the things they said very clearly to us was that the Clean and Safe program, our ambassadors, had worked very well. They, in fact, did make people feel safer downtown. They did feel that downtown was cleaner. And again, we did that in conjunction in working with the City of Cleveland. But they also said to us very clearly that we needed to spend more time, more energy, and more concentration on the downtown office market. And we essentially began moving down 2 paths. One was a marketing path, and hopefully some of you have seen some of the results of our marketing team in terms of creating new messages, in terms of the opportunities that downtown provides, the opportunities for success. And we very strategically designed a strategy that had a champions approach, where business people were talking to other successful business people, and that became part of our core approach. And we just rolled that out in January. The second is we increased our staff capacity by creating our new Business Development Center. I think you're aware that we've added Michael Deemer to the staff as our Director of Business Development, and we're expanding our staff capacity. Sherry Drake is joining him in that configuration, and we're going to add a 3rd person to that. And they're going to wake up every day of the week thinking, how can we promote downtown to prospective tenants? How can we keep our existing tenants? And how we can create a value proposition so that people are going to feel more comfortable in making those types of investments. Part of that also, in terms of anticipation, and let me note, again, another news piece from over the weekend, was a piece by Brent Larkin in Sunday's paper about East 9th Street. Historically, our financial district. And again, we reached out to strategic partners like David Browning, who's here with us today, and Al Wyant, to begin thinking about, from a private sector and a public sector perspective, how do we anticipate what's happening on East 9th Street? How do we begin to think about it more aggressively, recognizing, to be frank, that we may not have quite the office demand that we had historically, and therefore how do we create a mixed-use strategy and rebrand that from what once was the financial district to now the 912 district. So again, being proactive, being anticipatory, beginning to think through issues before they move forward. And then the last thing I'd share with you is, again, another example of that collaboration was the Warehouse District. Many of you in this community know that it went through a difficult period last year in terms of some of the issues surrounding the activities of people coming out of the clubs late at night, some of the police response, some of the racial issues that were identified. Again, our response was we worked very proactively on it. We worked with the City of Cleveland, the Mayor's Office, worked with Councilman Sipperman, the Warehouse District stakeholders. And the net result of that collaborative effort was an MOU that was announced a couple weeks ago that provides our boilerplate and our prototype, not only for that district, but potentially for every neighborhood in downtown and in the rest of the city about how to proactively deal with these issues. So again, another example, I think, where, again, we've anticipated or we've moved very, very quickly because of the partnerships that have been created to address the situation and hopefully allow us to move forward in a very constructive way.
Joe, often at these state of the whatever kind of events, so there's a moment where somebody says the state of the state is resolute, resilient, what? So what is it? The state of downtown is?
The state of the downtown is we have $2 billion of investment going on parochially into downtown Cleveland. And we have a unique opportunity to leverage that investment in a way, to be frank, we haven't had since the Gateway Complex was built nearly 18, 20 years ago.
Let me ask you about that, because you just mentioned Gateway, and that brings to mind a question that when we had originally scheduled this, I posted on Facebook, hey, this is happening, anybody got questions? And there was a lot of concern. The responses that I received were focused on this one issue, and so I'll ask the question that Anastasia Pancios asked, which is this. We had centralized downtown development on steroids in the 90s, I believe that's Gateway. And so did it help population retention? Did it create or save jobs cost effectively? Or could more or better jobs have been created by investing the money differently? And I guess the real question is, because I don't know that we got the jobs that we hoped to get out of that. We didn't get the population retention we hoped to get out of that. We did it anyway, and we got something out of it. We still haven't gotten a winning baseball team. But
we did for 10 years.
But the point is, what are the lessons there? And are you applying those? How are those lessons being applied today with these big, glitzy projects that we have going on right now? A casino, a convention center, a major development in the Flats East Bank.
Well, again, I go back to the connectivity question, because in some ways, if everybody in this room were asked a series of questions, how many people in the room think that Playhouse Square has done gangbusters since we invested in that public infrastructure, for example, in Gateway? Everybody agree? How many
let the record show for the radio audience
you.
that there's a large showing of hands.
How many people think the Warehouse District, for example, has really accelerated in terms of its mixed-use capacity? And the point I'm making by bringing those examples up is where we may have failed is we haven't connected those investments properly in the past. And that's why I think the work of the Group Plan Commission is so important, because for the first time now, we're not talking about isolated investments. We're talking about how we can collaboratively connect those investments in a way so that the pedestrian environment and some of the public realm questions that Mike noted a minute ago can be maximized. So from my perspective, this next phase, again, leveraging these investments and, again, connecting them in a way that's very proactive, I think is going to be the key.
Joe Marinucci, just for clarity's sake, explain the group plan. Briefly, if you would.
The Group Plan Commission, a number of months ago, Mayor Jackson convened a group of about 15 business and community stakeholders and asked them to begin to look at the fact that we were going to be experiencing these major investments in downtown, the Flats East Bank project, the Medical Mart, the Convention Center, the casino. There were a number of other things historically that occurred in downtown. East 4th Street, again, Playhouse Square, the towpath trail, and some of the other investments that are going forward.
Public Square.
Public Square, excuse me. And the mayor essentially said, how do we begin to look at the physical relationships? How do we, from a pedestrian perspective, begin to connect those more effectively? And by the way, all the way to the lakefront, I failed to mention that, Dan. And essentially, he charged the group to look at design alternatives that would allow that to occur, looked at governance structures that would allow that to be implemented, and thirdly, asked the community to look at potential financing options. And all those committees working under the umbrella of the commission have come forth, as you know, with a recommendation that we, in a first phase, spend about $100 million, and one of the centerpieces will be an investment in Public Square.
We'll be passing the hat later.
Yes.
Talk about, I'd like to hear, David Feehan, from you first, and then Mike Edwards, about this idea of connectivity. When you look out at the landscape of downtowns across the country, who's doing the connectivity right that we should be looking at and modeling Cleveland's growth on?
Well, first of all, let me say, with respect to what Joe said, that Oftentimes the measures of success that we layer onto projects like Gateway are totally unrealistic. I mean, may have been a question of putting your finger in the dike and stanching the flow. I was on the All-American City jury, and I think in 1985 when Cleveland was named an All-American City. And we were looking then at a city that had really, really come out of the depths and was really starting to get its feet underneath it again. So I think it's really important to have realistic expectations of what a project like this can do, and to not imagine that project, there is no silver bullet. There is no single project that's going to all of a sudden magically create jobs and fix downtown.
Should we stop mentioning jobs figures when we talk about them?
We can talk about jobs created, but net jobs in the whole city, I don't think that's really a fair measurement. What cities are really doing a good job of this connectivity? One city that I think has done quite a good job is my hometown of Minneapolis. They've created what they call the Loring Park Greenway. Mm-hmm. And it connects the old Nicollet Transit Mall to the Walker Arts Center, to the Sculpture Garden, to Loring Park, to a whole range of downtown housing. About 35,000 people live in downtown Minneapolis right now. And they have instituted something called Walkable Minneapolis. It's a program that will connect all of downtown in a very walkable way. Walkable, bikeable, ways that you can leave your car and get around. So I think Minneapolis is doing a pretty good job of that. Memphis, Tennessee is another town that I would just mention because Memphis, 20 years ago or so when we had our annual conference there, IDA had our annual conference, was a place that everybody said, we never want to come back here. This downtown is dead and it's not of interest. They did a lot of things, but one of the things they created was a trolley system. And the trolley system circulates through downtown and around to the riverfront. And Memphis went from
This is not light rail, this is bus, this is trolley on
this
wheels?
This was rail. Rail system. But what they did was they connected nearby residential neighborhoods. And Memphis went from 0 downtown residential to about 25,000 people living in or in very close proximity to downtown, and that's made a whole lot of other things possible. So this connectivity that Joe talks about is extremely important, and one of the things it has to connect to is downtown residential. And if I look at Cleveland today and 10,000 people living downtown, I say, thumbs up, great job. Now you need another 10,000 in the next 5 to 10 years.
One of the big challenges with connectivity has to do with waterways and the bridges that go over them. How does that work in Pittsburgh?
Well, it's really the purview of river life, and we have a lot of bridges. More bridges than Venice is what we say in Pittsburgh. I find that hard to believe. Being from Buffalo, I find that hard to believe, but, okay.
Pittsburgh always makes me think of Venice.
Wait till we tell you about Paris.
I think that in terms of the connectivity, there's some needs for pedestrian connections, pedestrian bridge connections. There's certainly lots of ways to go across on sort of standard sidewalk. And they really want to really embellish that with high design on those particular pedestrian walkways. If I could, for downtown Pittsburgh, in terms of connectivity, one of the programs that we're working on, or have been working on the last 3 years, is something actually called Paris to Pittsburgh. It was actually delivered to us from a foundation that literally came into our office and said, hey, we were all just in Paris, and we think it's really great how you can sit out at a cafe and sort of interact with the city. And as you know, when people walk down a street, if there's things going on inside and you can smell the bakery and you can hear the clanking of forks and spoons and you can see people laughing and hear laughter coming out of these spaces, it makes for a much more dynamic downtown, a much better experience, even if you're not spending money. You're just sort of part of it. And of course, you have that happening on 4th Street.
East 4th.
East 4th. And so we have this a project called Paris to Pittsburgh, and it's all about opening up the storefront. So it's not a facade program per se, but it's if you want to put lever doors or garage door, whatever, to open up your space and spill out onto the streets of Pittsburgh, we're all about that. And we've done about 40 of them. And I bring it up because they provide the connectivity. It gets people walking around more. They want to see what's around the next corner. And it's that interface, or that building front, really where the downtown revitalization stuff, in my opinion, really takes hold. These big, huge projects, critically important, but if you got kind of yuck in between them, connectivity, you know, you don't get maximum value out of those.
Would you talk a little bit, Mike Edwards, about the design experiments that you did for Market Square? Because I think there's probably some opportunities for the Cleveland community.
Yeah, we stumbled upon this. We're not brain surgeons, but the foundations were nice enough to give us, two foundations gave us $100,000 each. So we had $200,000, and the whole idea of the money was to do some design experiments in Market Square. We sort of thought that if we expanded these sidewalks, we could get people to sit outside. If we limbed up the trees, if we put on certain kinds of programming, we could have some success in the square. And so we did that. We took some money and we bought bollards and stanchions and bollards, and we took a row of parking away, and we actually put chairs and tables in the street, expanding the size of the sidewalk. And sure enough, they filled right up with people, and they're sitting really in the gutter. I mean, it was kind of gross. But they did it. And
they did this in New York City, too. Mayor Bloomberg did it in Herald Square. And
it was our idea.
I know. Obviously, all the great ideas come from Pittsburgh. but I know what you mean. I mean, it sort of feels odd at first.
Yes, and so right, but people filled them up, and so then, and from a programming side, we thought, wouldn't it be cool if people were invited to come down into the evening, and some kind of roving, odd art visual thing kind of came floating through the square. They'd see it. They'd say, that was really weird. That guy was pounding nails into his head as he was walking through the square. And they'll tell their friends, and then their friends will come down thinking something's going to happen next Thursday night downtown. And so those were sort of experiments. Some of them were better than others, some of them worked, some of them didn't. But we learned how to use the square. And so after all of that was done, as you might imagine, it made it much easier to go to the foundations and ask for $5 million so that we could actually renovate the square. Because we could actually show them, if we extend these sidewalks, people will sit at these chairs. If we extend these sidewalks, Permani's table count will go from 50 to 100. Automatically, we're going to increase their business. It's good for business. And so what was a public space, we really focused on the sidewalks, because that's kind of what we can play in the sidewalks, and we created new economy on Market Square. And so now we have up-tenanting going on, the rates are going up, and people are actually starting to live above the square. So it's a very small, compared to your public square, I mean, it's a very small project. I understand that. But I think the idea of these experiments to kind of get people to buy in, and what was nice is they were experiments. So if they failed, who cares? It doesn't kill the project. You failed, you tried, okay, fine. Do something else. Try something else. So that was really a good lesson for us.
Now, these are things they're similar things that have been tried here. I mean, I'm going to forget the name of the space underneath the bridge. The Detroit Superior Bridge. The trying to inhabit that with the Ingenuity Festival and other events. But your job, all of you, is to think about the design experiment you want to see, and then tell Joe. We have to take our mid-program break right now. I'm going to read some announcements, and then we'll get to your questions. So now's the time where if you have questions, you should start getting ready to shoot your hand up. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, if you're just joining us, we are listening to a special program featuring a panel discussion called The State of Downtown, featuring Michael Edwards, the former president and CEO of the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership, David Feehan, the president of Civitas Consultants, and also the former president and CEO of the International Downtown Association, and Cleveland's own Joe Marinucci, president and CEO of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. Well, as I said, we'll be back with the traditional City Club questions in a moment, and you are, of course, encouraged to formulate your questions as questions. We welcome all of you here, especially those of you who are guests and those of you who are soon to become members. This was not an invitation to start talking. This was not. Quiet down. We hope you will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. This Friday, March 25th, City Club welcomes Radyanjit Sondi of Discover Help Incorporated, and he's also a radio personality who will discuss creating new immigrants. And then Wednesday, March 30th, the City Club will host Karen Gall-Mills, Executive Director for Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, who will address the state of our arts. If you wish to make reservations or order a CD or DVD of today's program, you can call 1-888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082, or visit us online at cityclub.org. We're pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, Cresco, the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Greystone Properties, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Historic Gateway Neighborhood and Historic Warehouse District, Medical Mutual of Ohio, and Porter, Wright, Morris, and Arthur. Thank you all for your support. We're also pleased to welcome students who are here as part of the City Club Student Program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Fred E. Scholl Foundation. Bernard L. Carr, Chairman. With us today are students from Jane Addams Design Lab. I would like to ask those students to please stand up to be recognized. Now it's time for your questions and their answers. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today are City Club Membership and Marketing Manager Heather Sikora and Program Director Carrie Miller. Our first question, please.
Since all our regions and the cities we're talking about really need to repopulate and reinvigorate economically, what about these two specific markets what are you doing to target these, which are immigrants, both on a national and international level, and then a sub-35 group? Because I think some things they have in common is the first thing they do before they select a city to go to, is there a job available? What kind of non-work activities are available in that city? And then the housing. And so if you can address that in the downtown concept.
Joe Marinucci.
Well, as you know, there's a local initiative that has organized itself over the last 18 months or so. We're very supportive of that initiative.
You're talking about Global Cleveland?
Global Cleveland, I'm sorry, yes. And we recognize that from a downtown perspective, the urban environment that we're trying to create, we think will be very attractive to some of the immigrant communities that they're going to be looking to target. So from our perspective, it's really looking to create the environment that would allow that type of initiative to really take a foothold in downtown. But again, from our perspective, it's not one of our core initiatives, but we're very, very supportive working with the larger community in terms of moving that initiative.
What about attracting young professionals? That was part two of the question.
Obviously, young professionals really represent the core of what we're trying to do in terms of creating both an investment opportunity and a housing opportunity downtown. The best example of that is Rosetta. When Rosetta announced that they were coming into downtown Cleveland, obviously they took a building that was underutilized, made a major investment in downtown, brought 400 employees into downtown. It wasn't by accident that across the street, the 668 building, which was being renovated, became one of the prime location for the young professionals being employed by Rosetta. And I think 50 to 75 of those employees are in that building.
Really?
So again, it's creating the opportunities, bridging them, providing the value proposition, and we know that young professionals want the type of environment that we're creating in downtown, and again, as long as we can continue to build on it, they're going to look to come.
How has that worked in Pittsburgh, Mike Edwards?
Not very well. Pittsburgh gets the Achilles heel of their overall regional strategy. The city was built on immigrants, but the sort of the new immigrants are seen to be somewhat less visible, less welcome, I suppose. Moved to Spokane, and it's even worse. I mean, they got a diversity complex because there's no diversity in Spokane. And so most communities recognize that if you can't attract immigration or immigrants, you're not going to be successful, because the inevitable demographic trend is there's going to be 500 million people in America, and most of that growth between now and then until 2040 is going to come from immigrants. So if your city isn't welcoming, and those folks tend to be a bit more urban in orientation, they'll come and live downtown if you have places for them and you're welcoming. Pittsburgh has struggled with that, and Spokane is nowhere.
Dave Feehan, are there any cities that are, who are the cities where the immigrants are, which are the cities where immigrants are going? What are they doing right?
Well, let me give you one really good example. A couple years ago, I saw this statistic. In the city of Los Angeles, 2/3 of the commercial real estate transactions that took place over a decade were with first-generation Americans. 2/3. That means people leasing stores and buying buildings and fixing them up. Not always pretty, sometimes, just a place to get started, but there's an enormous amount, a reservoir of energy among the immigrants that are coming here, and the communities that welcome them and that really work hard at it. It takes some time. You have to establish a foothold, and people have to come and tell other people to come. But if you work at it, you can do it. And Cleveland and Pittsburgh can do it. Los Angeles, as I said, for all of the difficulties that we hear, Los Angeles has done a good job of supporting people who are coming to America.
Mm-hmm. Let's get a question from over here again.
I'm on? Okay.
Yes.
This is a question to anyone on the panel or all, and it concerns connectivity that we talked about, but I want to ask the connectivity between Pittsburgh and Cleveland. I've read a few articles recently on the advantages of the connection between Pittsburgh and Cleveland versus Cleveland and Columbus, and it comes down to high-speed rail between the two cities. Would you address that?
Cleveburg, go.
Right. Well, it's a bit outside of my mission at the Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership. However, I do know that our targeted cluster areas are very much the same. Enhanced metals and medical clusters. Those are very similar to what Cleveland and Pittsburgh have. So there's sort of reasons for us to kind of work together. I can't speak specifically to rail, but the growth in this notion of natural gas extraction is big in Pittsburgh. It's really driving a lot of our office market downtown. I know that's something that's coming or is here in Ohio, and it might be sort of a new enough cluster that we could actually get some regional energy around that particular item. You know, I don't know, I was asking this morning, I don't know if the Cleveland Clinic and UPMC are competitors. I mean, I don't quite know how healthcare industries work. But to the extent they are, I think that makes it a little problematic in order to coordinate. But if they're up for it, I would bet the civic leadership would follow.
Of course, there are other healthcare facilities too, but yes.
Understood.
Joe, do you have anything, Joe Marinucci, anything to add to that?
No, again, I haven't been at the apex of those discussions. Some other people, as you know, in the room, for example, Greater Cleveland Partnership, have been involved in some of those. But I just came back from spending 3 days in Washington, D.C., and it just strikes me that if you look at the East Coast corridor and the amount of investment that's occurred in the corridor, we should, in the Midwest, be able to figure out that same type of opportunity, whether it's, again, from Pittsburgh to Cleveland, Cleveland to Detroit, and so on,
Chicago,
and Chicago, and whether it's rail that becomes the organizing impetus, or whether it's technology-based. I think we have an opportunity. It'll obviously be a long-term threshold, but I think we should pursue it.
Let's take another question.
Joe, this is for you. We're all pleased with the results from Public Square to 9th and from 13th up through Cleveland State to Midtown. What's happening in the middle? You talk about connectivity.
The 912 district?
You got 912 district. What's happening there? Could you give us some ideas of some projects that are in store?
Well, again, the key in the 912 district, and there really are two. If you think about it, you're talking about a T. Talking about the financial district from Euclid to Lakeside, and then again the core intersection at 9th and Euclid. And as you know, there's a developer who owns a number of properties between between the Huntington Building and East 12th Street. We are working to try to resolve that situation. To be frank, unfortunately, the developer was not able to reach some of the visions that he had for those properties. And to be frank, we're working with people who have those properties under contract. We are working to preserve the federal and state historic tax credit aspects of those projects, and we're looking hopefully to have a short-term solution which will allow those projects to move forward. When we talk about leverage, let me point out that the state historic tax credit is going to be one of the most important tools, and we're working aggressively to try to have that program renewed from the state of Ohio's budget perspective. But again, that's part of the strategy. In terms of the rest of
Quick clarifications in there. Sure. Is the state historic tax credit in Governor Kasich's proposed budget?
It is not in the current budget, although there is some reauthorization language that deals with reappropriating funds for projects that may not go forward throughout the state.
And what you've talked about projects, couldn't realize the project, couldn't realize the vision. What was the vision? What is it that's not happening?
Well, again, unfortunately, we were in a situation where the developer did not, to be frank, have the wherewithal to move the project forward, Dan, and my chairman is laughing at you. And the vision essentially was to fully renovate through the credits those properties. Now, again, we have an opportunity that remains there. I want to be clear about that because the state has already assigned credits to 5 of those buildings. So our goal as a community is to keep the credits in place, maximize them, and then bring a new developer into place so that we can move the project forward.
So, but what you're trying to do is find a developer who is capable of securing the financing to get the rest of the job done. And the rest of the job would be mixed use, retail on the bottom, some office, some residential.
Right.
Okay.
And remember, this is not dissimilar to what happened in the 1990s when I came back to Cleveland working with then Mayor White, and that was we had a portfolio of about $25 million worth of urban development action grants that were at risk unless we figured out a way to keep those in the community. And to be frank, we were able to do that, and that spawned a new wave of investment, much of it, in residential redevelopment.
What about the Rotunda, the Cleveland Trust Rotunda, and the Ameritrust Tower, the Breuer Building?
The Rotunda, obviously, with some new leadership at the county, with County Executive Ed Fitzgerald, I think we're waiting to see exactly what his thoughts and what the council's thoughts are going to be in terms of the potential for that property. And obviously, it's an important site. We're very cognizant of that, and we're following it very closely.
Is that also something where you're thinking that you may play a role to find a developer, help that
we
process
will act
along?
as a facilitator and really work with the development community to hopefully put a package together that could work.
Thank you for raising that question, sir. Next question.
Thank you all for being here at the City Club. It's a great program. On this connectivity point, we're interested in thinking about the lakefront here, and some of you who focus more in other cities would be interested in your thoughts from your perspective on to what extent it's an unrealized resource, but more specifically, how can we enhance connectivity to the lakefront, and once we have that connectivity, what are we connecting to? Or what should we be connecting to?
It's a body of water that we're connected to, right?
Short of the water.
Well, let's start with David Feehan. Your perspective on Cleveland's lakefront and the possibilities there, and the relevant comparisons, and then Joe Marinucci, an update, please.
Well, just having water. I mean, there are many cities that are landlocked, or they have maybe a very small river or something. So they have that immense body of water there is a huge advantage if you take advantage of it. But what we've done with our American cities for so long is we put the industrial uses right on the water and completely cut off people from using it. As we look around, there are a number of cities, I think, that are beginning to make much better use of the riverfront. I worked in Des Moines for 5 years, and Principal Financial Group has invested a huge amount of private sector dollars in bringing people back to the water, to the Des Moines River. But oftentimes it's a matter of deciding how much of that is going to be private and exclusive to the people who live there or own the property, and how much of it is going to be public and what those public uses are. We're seeing a lot of activity all around the country now, so it certainly behooves Cleveland to look at what other people are doing and find out what's working.
David Feehan is with Civitas Consultants. Joe Marinucci of Downtown Cleveland Alliance. We've of the $2 billion you referenced earlier, none of that is being spent on the lakefront. And several years ago, not many years ago actually, the port commissioned a whole plan by Stan Extot to redevelop in several phases the port-owned property, the publicly owned property. What's the status?
Well, again, just to really touch on a number of things. One is under the leadership of the mayor and the Department of Port Control, actually EEK was brought back to Cleveland based upon some of the work he did at the port, and is now working with the city on some development vision for North Coast Harbor. And as you know, that is an area where we've not experienced the type of development historically that we thought. And part of that thinking is the marina that was just announced a couple weeks ago in terms of the transient marina. So in some ways that in my mind is a great step. It also marries some of the thinking that occurred to develop Dock 32, which is from the Brown Stadium north at the 50-yard line to the dock edge. And really, if you look at that in a comprehensive way, I think now we're beginning to see some incremental investment as a result of that. The second is I think the Flats East Bank project is really going to galvanize a lot of interest. That's, again, everybody knows the E&Y Tower and the Aloft hotel there. The developers very recently have indicated that they now are accelerating their review of phase 2 of that project because of some of the momentum that's being created. So I think that that's going to be an important step. And the third is, as the Group Plan Commission looked at that connectivity issue, they felt that there was an opportunity to build a very aesthetically appealing pedestrian bridge that would connect from the malls directly to North Coast Harbor. And as you know, part of our challenge historically has been the connectivity really routes through East 9th Street, and that's a fairly difficult environment in terms of pedestrians. So again, creating that pedestrian bridge, I think, is a great opportunity to galvanize some additional investment.
The other pedestrian bridge is admittedly very ugly, too. The one that all the Browns fans go over.
Very functional.
Functional, but not aesthetically pleasing. I think we have another question.
With regard to success in city development and reversing the trend of sprawl, Cleveland is probably ground zero for suburban retail development. So give some examples of downtowns that have been able to reverse the trend and bring people back downtown. And Mr. Edwards, you are from Pittsburgh, and although I don't like to give credit to the Steelers, you folks have a lot of events and a lot of success in the sports arena, as well as a concentration of colleges. How have you been able to use your development to boost the role of event traffic in downtown Pittsburgh?
Well, I'm going to give you 3 examples. 3 cities that I've had close experience with. Austin, Texas, we struggled for a long time. It was a sleepy state capital. It did develop an entertainment district, 6th Street, but it was really struggling in terms of retail. And they undertook a very aggressive retail plan that included a mix of national chains and local stores. And they have some really wonderful independent retailers or small chains. If you ever get to Austin, go to Amy's Ice Cream. They put on a great show, if any of you know the place. Austin is really a great story of a turnaround. One of the cities that I think was really almost in a category with Detroit in terms of urban decay was St. Louis. And St. Louis's strategy was to build downtown housing first, and thereby creating a market for downtown retail, particularly home furnishings and so forth. And they had great success. Problem is right now they haven't been building new housing units, so the demand for home furnishings has fallen off somewhat. So you can't be a one-trick pony. The most interesting example, and I think most successful and imaginative for a smaller city, was Holland, Michigan. And what Holland did was they had a main street that was 80–90% vacant, a lot of the buildings like you've mentioned with old metal facades and everything. And they put together a combination of land acquisition and a cooperative project with property owners. They put in a snow melt system so that the streets and the sidewalks were always clear of snow. And then what they did is they went in a 2-hour radius of Holland and picked out individual retailers who were really independent but very, very good, and said, don't close your store in Kalamazoo or Grand Rapids or Lansing, just open a second location here. And they put together one of the best collections of retail, hand-picked retailers. It was a great strategy, and they did this about 20 years ago, and it's still holding.
Fascinating. Mike Edwards.
Thanks for the question. Let me preface this by saying that I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. Okay.
Well done.
I hate the Steelers. I do.
Wow. Hey, you're throwing red meat down.
I like the Browns. But the Steelers are an amazing company. They have branded everything in Pittsburgh. My kids would go to school and they'd come home branded Steelers. I mean, it's just amazing what they've done. And so the Steelers, they're committed to the team, and they do create a lot of energy and a lot of great events that occur downtown. And we try to capitalize on those as you might expect. One of the other things we talked about last night is Pittsburgh's great at manufacturing events that rallies the corporate community, the governmental community for something very specific. And an obvious example would be the Major League Baseball All-Star Game. They competed, they went for that, they got it, and the whole town got excited about that. And Mayor O'Connor, now deceased, was just a champion of that particular event and just rallied everybody. And then when there's nothing going on, they make them up. So all of a sudden it was the 250th birthday of the name, not of Pittsburgh, of the naming of Pittsburgh. we all sort of struggled with that, but it was enough to get the foundation community and the government and the corporate leaders to all say, and everybody gets sort of really focused on the same thing, the same topic. It's a great way to build self-esteem. Pittsburgh does not have a self-esteem problem. A lot of communities like Buffalo do. Pittsburgh does not, and they love their city. It's almost, it's tiresome sometimes if you're not from there. But they're really great at getting everybody together and moving in one direction. So events are, a really great opportunity and generate a ton of business for downtown.
I'm glad we got Mike after he left Pittsburgh.
After he left Pittsburgh, right. Now he's allowed to say all of that. Congratulations.
Did I say hate?
Big
I don't
move.
mean hate.
What about the Winter Classic?
Right, so they compete for the Winter Classic, they get that event, and
100,000 people.
Tons.
100,000 people.
Yes.
Joe Marinucci, we're almost out of time. There's been a lot of ideas put out on the table, and I wonder, as you're thinking about what you might be saying a year from now, what are the ideas that have been mentioned? Are you eager to follow up on?
Well, I like the the best of Holland retail strategy. I think that resonates very well. I think all of us in Northeast Ohio can pinpoint their favorite X, Y, and Z, and I think that's a neat, very doable strategy because again, it's self-contained in terms of the market and one that we could potentially look at. I like the design experimentation. Again, we as a community at times have brought in very proactive design discussions. But what I like is the incremental experimentation aspects of it. And, for those of us, for example, who live and work downtown, you recall in Public Square we had a water main break that occurred. And that, in some ways, was an experiment in and of itself. And maybe we need to dovetail that with some incremental retail.
Last point from Mike Edwards, very briefly.
Right, I just wanted to say one of the experiments that we did was we took transit out of Market Square. No buses, no cars. And we invited people to come down and feel the difference. And it was palatable, the difference in the square. And that's really what made that experiment stick.
Unfortunately, the CEO of the Greater Cleveland RTA has already left the room, so we'll have to just follow up with him on that separately. Mike Edwards, formerly of the Downtown Pittsburgh Pittsburgh Partnership,
right.
And Pittsburgh Downtown Partnership,
Correct.
pardon me, and Dave Feehan of Civitas Consultants, Joe Marinucci of the Downtown Cleveland Alliance. Thank you very much, all three of you.
Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to a panel discussion on the state of downtown. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to you listening on the air, and we're done.